guys 5 minutes to do a little introduction. I'm going to cut them off firmly so everybody has equal time, and then we'll go from there.
Good. So I'm going to start. So obviously inequalities become, I'd say over the last 4 or 5 years, a huge issue in the United States. Interestingly, I don't think it's been much of an issue before that, but it suddenly became this primary issue. It got to a point where you couldn't open up a New York Times or Washington Post paper on any given day and not find several articles blaming almost every problem in the world, including terrorism in the Middle East, on the issue of inequality, on the issue of the gap. Remember, inequality is the gap between rich people and poor people, rich in the middle class and poor, but something about the gap in income or wealth, depending on who you speak to. Some people refer to income, some people refer to wealth, but you get the general idea. It's the material difference between us. Obviously, President Obama has said this is the problem of our time. The Pope said this is the biggest economic issue of our time. And many people attribute the election of Donald Trump last week to people's angst about the issue of inequality. So I'm going to argue today that inequality is irrelevant. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a who cares. That there are real problems in the American economy, in American society. There are problems of poverty. There are problems of people being poor and not having the tools, not having the environment in which they can rise up easily into the middle class and above. There's a problem of no economic growth. The economy is not really growing or growing too slowly, so that the middle class feels constrained because there's so little economic growth, so they don't feel like their standard of living is rising. And there's a problem at the top, a real problem at the top, and that is the problem of cronyism. There's much too much government in bed with business, determining winners and losers, and as a consequence, some people gaining money, not because of their skill in the marketplace or because of values they produce, but because they're in bed with the right politicians. All those problems are real. They're happening, and they need to be dealt with. None of those problems are caused by inequality. Not a single one of them. Inequality might be a consequence of some of them. But it's not the consequence that is the problem. It's the underlying phenomenon. The phenomenon of lack of mobility, the phenomenon of cronyism, the phenomenon of no economic growth. Those are what we should be focused on and trying to find solutions for. Indeed, I'd argue, that most of the proposals to deal with inequality will make the problem of poverty worse, the problem of cronyism worse, and the problem of no economic growth worse. So the proposals being provided, much larger redistribution of wealth, more regulations, more controls, raising the minimum wage, will all make these problems much, much worse. In a free market, which I believe is the solution to all three problems, in a free market, people make money by creating values. They make money by selling us services or products that we value. You become very, very, very rich in a free market by improving the lives of lots and lots and lots of people. Great. I love billionaires if they made their money honestly and in the marketplace. Because I know that every billionaire out there that did that has made my life, or somebody's life that I know, better off. Whether it's a Bill Gates, or a Steve Jobs, or Sam Walton. They created wealth by making my life better. It's indeed the only way you can create wealth in a free market. I buy an iPhone for $300. How much is the iPhone worth to me? Well, more than $300, otherwise I wouldn't have bothered. My life is better off of that. Apple made a profit. Cool. They made a profit off of making my life better. That's wonderful. Or take, what have I got, 45 seconds? Okay, so I leave my J.K. Rowling's example. Right, I'll end with this. Right? J.K. Rowling became a billionaire. She used to be a welfare mom. Income inequality exploded because of that. And yet it's wonderful. I got poorer because of J.K. Rowling. I'm really depressed, right? I don't know about you guys. I read all the books. My two sons read all the books. I went to all the movies. I spent over $1,000 on J.K. Rowling's stuff. I got poorer by $1,000. She became a billionaire. There's income inequality for it. But you know what? I am much, much better off for having read Harry Potter and for my kids having read Harry Potter. Who cares that she became a billionaire? I actually think it's a good thing, not a bad thing. Thank you.
I should start saying I'm against equality, in particular regarding time. I want to have more time. So, first of all, I should say I'm here mostly to react to Yaron's views, and I want not to distort your views in trying to react to your views. And your argument is, I think, a variation of an argument that has been fairly typical in this discussion, which is essentially the issues are, I'm going to simplify it, and then you said a few other things, but the issue is not inequality, the issue is poverty at the bottom. You said cronyism at the top, and you said also growth. This is sort of the three sort of issues. But in the debates of inequality, I do inequality to the extent that inequality is relevant for Latin American economies. It's a fairly common argument. You shouldn't care about poverty, you should care about inequality. So there is no relevance to the issue of inequality, what you call the gap. So the difference between the wealth, however you measure that, the wealthy and the relatively poor. However, your own argument of how we solve all of these three problems, which is the free market solves all the problems, is that you said, I love billionaires. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Sam Walton, and J.K. Rowling. I hate her. I hate those films and that.
Films will take
that's another story. But, I like George Lucas, and Star Wars. That's another story. So the story has implicitly an idea that inequality matters, and so that inequality, you actually like inequality. That's what you're saying. You think inequality is good because inequality is functional to solve the problem. You're saying, again, part of what is the conventional story in economics, we still teach it, I'm sorry to say, to all students in a sense, the idea that it provides the incentives. So the person that is poor, by the fact that they are lagging behind, they have to work harder and sort of improve. And I have problems with all of these arguments. So I have problems with the notion that only poverty matters. I have problems with the idea that the incentives are what matter to create wealth. And so I suppose we're going to go back and forth, and we'll have more time to go into several of these. Let me just give the first sort of shots at these ideas. First of all, I think at the core of this is a question of causality. So you also said, and again, quote, correct me if I'm wrong, that you think that some of these three problems are cause inequality. So you said inequality is the result of, for example, the lack of growth. That's what you would sort of suggest. And that's fair enough. I think that there is a two-way road sort of in that respect. But the problem is that inequality is instrumental in generating some of these three problems. So inequality causes some of them. So there is an issue of causality here, I think, at the heart of the differences in view. So I think that there is significant evidence that suggests that more egalitarian society, it's debatable, it's not valid in all circumstances in all times, but there is a substantive amount of evidence that suggests that equalitarian societies tend to grow faster, they have better social outcomes, including those associated to poverty. So more unequal societies will end up having not just higher levels of poverty, but worse health outcomes, lower life expectancy. So the US, for example, even though it's a very wealthy country, has worse health results, life expectancy, than almost all their peers in Europe, Western Europe, that are more egalitarian, even though we spend even more on health than they do. And there are several issues associated to inequality to explain that. I see that I have 1 minute. I also have an issue with the notion that, Bill Gates, where do I start? He bought for peanuts an operational system that he, basically what he did, his life better is by signing a contract with IBM, and that's the extent of his genius, and he got a monopoly. So you dislike monopolies, good Lord, I don't know if that, if you look at how the internet and all of those things happen, I dare and say the opposite word, it's not the free market. And I don't like facilist solutions, that it's all the free market solves everything. I also don't think the state solves everything. So I'm going to give you a fuzzy sort of rage story. But it was DARPANET. You can sort of check your emails there because the military were funded by the state and produced all of that technology, and I have 12 seconds, and and a lot of that was done by cooperation. So cooperation is as important as egoism and and the incentives of trying to better yourself. So cooperation matters too.
All right, a lot to talk about. So we won't have any problem bouncing off of each other. Let me be clear, just to clarify my view. I don't believe inequality is good because it's functional or because it provides incentives. I believe inequality is good because it is just. Because inequality is what happens when you leave people free. If you look around the room, we're all different. We all have different skills, we all have different talents, we all have different incentives, different motivations. Some of us work really, really hard and we get really great grades. Some of us cruise a little bit in college. Would you want to give the people who cruise a little bit in college the same grades as those who work really hard and get straight A's? Do you want to give everybody A's even when some people are smart and some people are not so smart? The reality is we're not all equally smart. So inequality is a reflection of our metaphysical nature. It's a reflection of who we are and what we are. It's a reflection of our morality. The fact is, we're unequal. Now, some of us even make choices not to be rich, like anybody who's chosen to be a university professor, right? University professors are typically...
I was already rich. I don't know that.
Some might be rich, some of us are not. We're not rich when we started. University professors don't make a lot of money, but they're really smart. They have high IQs. They could have probably gone... We could have probably gone to Wall Street or somewhere else and made quite a bit of money. Economics, finance, we know math, we can do this stuff, right? But we chose to be teachers because we love, hopefully, I hope this is true of most professors, we love teaching, or we love research. We love the intellectual engagement, and we're willing to give up, we're willing to give up some money in order to do the fun stuff that we love. Life is not about money, but life is about inequality. Everywhere you look, there's inequality. It's who and what we are as a species. We're different. And if you leave us free, then we're going to have different outcomes. So to me, inequality is a feature of freedom. That's why I love it. It's not a bug, to use tech terms, right? It's not a bug of freedom. It's a feature of freedom. Because I love freedom, and that's my key. I love freedom. I don't want people taking my stuff away from me in the name of some morality that they decide is good for me. I want to be free, and when you leave people free in any society, what you get is inequality. Now let me just address, so that's my moral point. My moral point is because I love individual freedom, because I believe individual freedom is the moral base. That's why I like inequality, because it's the obvious, necessary outcome of leaving people free. Okay, let's get a little bit to economics. What about these correlations? Well, look at the studies. Yes, Zimbabwe has very high inequality and has horrible health outcomes. By the way, how you measure health outcomes is very distorted, but we're not going to do a debate, hopefully, on healthcare, although we could. The United States might have lower life expectancy for a variety of reasons, but if you have cancer, or if you have heart disease, there is no better place in the world, because survivability rates for cancer and heart disease in the United States are far higher than anywhere else in the world. Far higher, not even close. So there are reasons why life expectancy is not, we don't match other countries in life expectancy. But these correlation studies, and it's correlation, it's not causality, but more than that, it's if you look at the studies and look how they group countries that are unequal and countries that are equal and what they're actually grouping around, they're very dubious. We can talk a lot about monopolies. I would love to stand here and defend Bill Gates. I have no problem, by the way, in a free market of somebody having a very large percentage of the market. I don't think that's an economic problem. I don't think in history we've seen economic problems in a relative free market come out of so-called monopolies. Corporation, I'll end with this. Yes, I love corporations. Capitalism is the system of cooperation. It's not the system of competition. The essential characteristic of capitalism is cooperation. You cooperate cooperation within a company, but think about, you know who makes some of the stuff in this? This is an Apple, by the way. You know who makes some of the stuff in this? Samsung. So they compete.
It's going to explode.
Apple has protected us from the explosive parts of the Samsung. Companies cooperate much more than they actually compete. The essence and the cooperation goes across with customers, suppliers, everywhere. The essential characteristic of capitalism is voluntary, win-win cooperation. I'm out saying.
Perfect.
You did a good job.
So, let's go back to some. I have a tendency to think of these things in more quantitative, functionalistic than sort of ways of looking at it. Yaron comes from a libertarian sort of philosophy, and I suppose he tends to think in terms of issues of ethics. So that's what you're referring to, and fairness and freedom. So I'll engage a little bit on that, but that's certainly not what I think is the most relevant issue in the discussion of. But it's fair enough. It's in the question there. It's inequality fair. It's a complex question. So a few years back, there was a study of capuchin monkeys, and they had to exchange a rock for a cucumber or a grape. And these are monkeys, not even apes. And the one monkey that kept giving the trainer a rock and got a cucumber, after twice of this happening, he gets pissed off and throws the cucumber. He wants a grape. He's not stupid. There's an intrinsically unfair exchange that the monkey's capable of understanding. So I think you've said that inequality is a feature of the species. So I'm
Of free markets. Free markets.
No, you said inequality.
We're different. Okay.
Maybe.
Sorry.
But not fair enough. But, and it's an intrinsic question of our morality, I think you said. So that would make us less than the capuchin monkeys. From what I understand, we evolved to have a sense of fairness. And I think when they teach political economy in this university, they teach about an experiment, which I forget the name. It's an experiment in which basically they give you $100 for one person that has to give the $100, and they make it's a little game, and they make a decision of how much money they give you back. And the notion is that they're not close to 50%, and there's extensive studies of this.
The ultimatum game?
The ultimatum game. So somebody was paying attention in that class. And so good for you. So the ultimatum game suggests that we are hardwired to think in terms of fairness, and that fairness it's not the fairness you suggest. The fairness of inequality is good. It's the fairness of some degree of equality is a good thing, and which again goes to the notion that because we lived, in hunter-gatherer societies for millennia before we came down, right after we came down from the trees, and so that means that we are probably hardwired to think in terms of fairness and that kind of inequality. So when I think of fairness and freedom is another word that you used, and I have some time. So, and that comes very often in terms of the discussions, for example, of free trade, which I think it's a terrible misnomer. People that think about free trade, and I don't know your positions, maybe you're very radical in terms of this, but people that are in favor of free trade, they're not often against, saying, look, we're going to decide that you cannot sell us poison. So there is a minimum of regulation that says, the things that are going to be sold in the market have to have some minimum standards. And that's already managed trade. So we're deciding that for phytosanitary rules, we're managing trade, which seems to be a reasonable thing to do. So, so the question we're discussing really is, where do you draw the line, you see? So obviously there is an issue of how much equality you want and how much inequality you want, and which seems more reasonable debate from my point of view, and how much inequality is fair, and how much it can hurt. And again, it goes to the issue of causality, and if we go back to those issues that, you sort of wave and dismiss the data, said, all the data, it's correlation, not causality, forget all of those studies. And there is a lot of problems with, with studies that's, it's obviously true. But the correlations that I'm suggesting are fairly strong, and and again, it indicate. For example, think of this. Let's forget Zimbabwe, which is probably an outlier anyways, and the U.S. is an outlier. But let's think globally. what's the period, you guys know what's the period in the whole history of humanity that we grew faster? It's a period called the Golden Age of Capitalism. So it's a period from the mid-40s to the early 70s. That's also the period in which the welfare state bloomed. So we had more government spending, significant redistribution policies in terms of health, social security, and so on and so forth, and yet we didn't have a problem in terms of growth. And I'm precise at 5 minutes.
All right, well, are we still going?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a lot there. I don't believe fairness is hardwired. I believe people's attitude towards fairness change all the time, and indeed attitudes towards fairness in Europe are very different than attitudes towards fairness in the United States, are very different than attitudes towards fairness, I suspect, I don't know this, in Latin America, but certainly in Europe.
About what?
About fairness. Attitudes in Europe and the United States, the attitudes towards fairness are very different. And attitudes towards fairness in the United States have changed over time. When surveys were done 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, asking questions about what other people made, people tended to have the attitude, I don't care, or good for them to being rich. We have become systematically over time more envious society. I believe that has to do with the rise of a certain philosophical attitude in this country that's more collectivistic, more egalitarian in terms of outcome. And again, we've seen this in this last election where both candidates, I believe, are both egalitarian and collectivistic, very collectivistic, both of them. So that we stop caring about the individualists. We're not anymore individualists, which I think is the core individualist, not in a sense of being on a desert island, but in a sense of primarily caring about your own well-being. We've stopped being a society of individualists, which was the way this country was founded, and have become a society much more like Europe, which is a collectivistic groupthink. I care about my position within the group rather about my position vis-a-vis relative to my talents, my abilities. I would like to see us returning to becoming individualists instead of being servants of some collective, which psychologically I think distorts our perception of fairness. I am for absolute free trade. Fraud is wrong. The only role of government, in my view, is to protect us from fraudsters and crooks and criminals and terrorists, but to protect us, to physically protect us. Yes, if you're selling poison and pretending it's food, then you should be banned, but that's not managed trade. That's just basic function of the courts and government. 40s and 70s growth, first empirically, economic growth was much faster from the Civil War till 1914, till the break of World War I, and the 40s and 70s, average growth then was higher. But 40s and 70s did not see a massive role of government in spite of the rhetoric. 40s there was a massive role of government because of the war. So a lot of money was put, but standard of living in the United States, GDP went up during the 40s, which is bizarre. It tells you to suspect GDP numbers, but it went up dramatically during the war. Standard of living collapsed. There was no welfare state in the 40s and 50s. Remember, the welfare state is the creation of the late 1960s. It's a creation of the Johnson administration, 65 to 68. So you had Social Security, but no Medicare, no Medicaid, no welfare state, no massive redistribution title under welfare state. That's all Johnson's Great Society, 68. And guess what happens right after that? Right after that, you get the 1970s, a period of stagflation, massive inflation, horrible economic growth. I always am bewildered by people who look back at the 70s and say, oh, what a wonderful period of time for America. It was one of the most horrible periods in entire American history. It was a dark, violent, horrible era in America. This is why they were willing to elect somebody who was as radical at the time as Ronald Reagan was. It was a depressing period. I lived in the US for a little while in the mid-70s. Wouldn't want to go back then in any respect. And New York was a dump. Nobody went out at night because it was dangerous. The economy was in a tank. American corporations were losing business in mass. In those days, the Japanese, of course, we demonized the Japanese in those days, right? We wouldn't let them buy assets in the United States. They were the bad guys. Trade barriers. Ronald Reagan passed a number of trade barriers against the Japanese to protect our industries. Now we're doing the same thing to Chinese. They are overpaying for our real estate, just like the Japanese overpaid for our real estate back then. There's nothing about the 1970s to glorify, really nothing, except the music. The music was the best. Popular music was very good in the 70s. So morally,
Hopefully not disco.
no, not disco. No,
Just sometimes
but
Friday,
yet,
man.
yeah, but then I correct myself.
No,
Not disco.
not disco.
Not disco. But hey, we had Pink Floyd.
Yeah, no, it's good. Progressive is fine.
It was good
My
music.
son would say punk. Fair enough.
Punk was awful. Off topic. All right. So, if you really want economic growth, the formula is simple. It's cut government, reduce government spending, reduce government regulation, reduce taxation, particularly taxation that is attempting to manipulate, that it is attempting to give favors to some at the expense of others, which is what Reagan tried to do in his Tax Simplification Act. It wasn't that simple, but he tried to do that. All right, so if you want real economic growth, every country that's deregulated, cut taxes, has done very, very well.
Okay, so we'll have, I think on that last note, I think I understand why the Oxford Dictionary gave, the post-truth, the word of the year. The countries that cut taxes and deregulated did well. We can talk about that. Certainly, Latin America, it's an experiment of, terrible consequences of exactly those policies. But let's go back to some of the stuff you said at the beginning. You suggested issues about fairness, so we're back to the issue of fairness in general, and I want to say something about that. You again brought something that it's often it's brought in these discussions of inequality, the idea that envy, that people that want more equality are envious, which is a funny thing. You suggest that equality, you say basically inequality is good. It provides incentives. You say that's not the main reason, but I know you said that it's not the main reason, but you use the argument. You get things from people that have incentive. As you said, it's because it's fair, and you have here an argument of envy. Envy exactly, it's the story of what's behind the good side, of inequality. Because if you're envious, that means that you would have the incentive to better yourself. On this issue of fairness, I think that, again, as I said, I don't think, I'm concerned with your sort of fundamentalist view, let's call it that. A view that inequality is always good and that individualism is always good, when the evidence is, by far, the evidence is that we are sort of a mixed bunch. We work better when we have some individualistic sort of concerns, but also some sort of cooperation. And then that's that sort of mix that it's visible in those things that I said before. So the game, it shows that we are hardwired to be cooperative. And I'll give you an example in which cooperation is central, the state is central, markets are central. So. And about growth, so we have always. So I'm going to choose to talk about this. So think of the world that that we have, these phones, the internet, and all of this. How it's possible? So we gave a monopoly to AT&T to have long-distance telecommunications, with one thing in exchange. That's what the government of the United States asks AT&T to do. All of the research and development you do, you give back free to all the companies around. And they used at that time at the beginning to do telecommunications from California to New York, big tubes. It was those things that used to have on TVs, the vacuum tubes. And this company, because they have a monopoly, they have tons of money, they have a mandate to do research and development, and they have to keep growing because of all of this stuff. They go and put all of these scientists to research on ways of doing this better, and they start to think of electronics. So Shockley is the guy but other two guys also got it independently within Bell Labs. So Bell Labs has a monopoly, which is a sort of a subsidy given by the state. So the state is providing them the resources by providing a monopoly for them to do this. And then this is given away. So you think of Texas Instruments, you think of for almost anything. So Silicon Valley, which is central to understand, and I think would agree to understand development, and you cited Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, happens because this man had studied, Shockley had studied in Stanford. And he goes back to Stanford and opens his own firm. He apparently was can I say this, an asshole? People hated him, and so they left.
After Trump was elected, you could say anything.
Yeah, apparently you're right. So they leave, and they create their own company. It's an iteration of companies, but one of those is Intel. So that's how that happens. So it's not the idea of the genius. What's behind your notion of it's the individual as a hero. It's the Superman that comes with one sort of big idea and solves all the problems. Whereas I tell my students when we talk about technology in class, technology is more like the IKEA chair. So you build one. The first chair is wobbly. Why? Because you've never done that before. The second one is sort of decent. The third one is perfect, and I'm sorry to say you cannot make a career out of that. But most of the technological development is associated to small, incremental, increasing knowledge, which is a cooperative game. It cannot be done by the individual. The first steam engine is from ancient times. It took us 2,000 years to make it useful. So it takes cooperation. So the idea of the hyper individualistic society, it's simply not in the facts.
How many more of these are we doing? Just I'm curious.
Well, we can move
We
to
can-
Q&A
no.
whenever you want.
Okay, let me address the question of individualism, because I think it's an important one, and then we can
Sure.
at some point we can open it up to the audience. Yeah, I mean, you can easily make a caricature of individualism. The guy living on a desert island all by himself, making everything, building everything, inventing everything. God forbid, he doesn't read Newton, he doesn't read anything because he has to invent everything from scratch. But that's a caricature. That's not what individualism means. Individualism means that the individual is the moral agent. The individual the purpose of government is to protect that individual's life, and the individual's purpose in life is to make his life the best that it can be. Now, what would you rather be as an individualist, right? You're 100% dedicated to your own life. That's all you care about. Would you rather live in a civilized society and cooperate with people to make things, and trade with them, win-win relationships with lots of people to grow and to become better and better, and to recognize the fact that you're standing on the shoulders of giants who came before you? Or live on a desert island all by yourself in the middle of the woods in Pennsylvania? Well, it's obvious. Society exists because it's good for us. Because as individuals, we thrive in society. It's much better to have lots of people to trade with. Division of labor, if you go back to Adam Smith, than to live in a society where you have to produce everything, as we did indeed, going back long enough into the past, human past. We were pretty poor back then. So cooperation is a feature, again, of freedom. It's a feature of individualism. But what would you rather work in a team of individualists, which means people thinking for themselves, people motivated to do the best job that they can because they want to be good at it, and who are communicating with one another because they want to achieve the greatest results, or a group where the group is the point, the group is the standard, and they're always looking for a leader, which always happens in a group where the group is the purpose, to tell them what to do, which is what collectivists always do. I would rather have a group of individualists any day, and I think most technology companies in Silicon Valley have that. Now, this issue about the internet being created by the government and so on, yeah, the military did a lot of research. Universities did a lot of research. Let me just say that even in a free market that I believe in, there would still be a military and they would be doing research. Even in a free market as I believe in, there would be universities. I hate to say it because this will create some controversy, but they would all be private, but there would still be universities and they would be doing research. So research would still be happening even in a free market. Yes, the basics of the internet were created in the university setting and in DARPA, which is a defense department. But none of that affected any of our lives until it became a commercial venture, until entrepreneurs figured out how to use it in order to make money. And they cooperated doing that. So Fairchild Semiconductors, which is the company that was created, then was the two spin-offs. One was Intel, the other spin-off was venture capital. Venture capital was invented from the people who came out, and they funded pretty much everything. Yeah, they worked together, they cooperated. Intel had to cooperate with Microsoft and with IBM. Apple had to cooperate with whoever they did. Again, how many different companies make stuff that goes into this iPad? Hundreds, maybe, who knows, maybe even thousands, I don't know. But lots. They all get paid. The beauty of the market system, the beauty of capitalism, is that everybody who adds value gets paid based on the value that they add. And if you add a lot of value, you get paid more. And if you add less value, or less value that lots of other people can provide, you get paid less. That's the way the system works. And in that sense, it's a virtuous system. The more you add, the more you get. The less you add, the less you get. So it's a free system in which people choose what to produce, who to work for, how much to charge for their labor or for their stuff. And in my view, and again, we can discuss the empirical evidence, the more the government gets involved, the less innovation, productivity, and economic growth you will get. I fly airplanes a lot. Basically, the airplanes I fly in today are the same airplanes we've had for 50 years. The 787, the greatest, best Boeing jet, is the same as the 707. It's actually slower. I've seen a graph where every 10 years the airplanes get slower. The one innovation in aircraft, which was the Concorde, was killed. The automobile, the internal combustion, basically the same car we have today. Almost no innovation in industries where you have heavy regulations. Huge innovation. After AT&T is broken up, because you allowed for a free market. That's when the innovation happens. The innovation happens when government steps back. When government stepped back from Silicon Valley, boom, it exploded. If government starts regulating Silicon Valley, which it's starting to do, you will get constrained. Taxis have not innovated until Uber showed up. And now that Uber is going to get regulated, that innovation is going to be crushed as well.
So
I'm out of time.
Let's do one more 5 minutes and then we'll move into closing statements and then we'll move into Q&A.
Third week, okay.
Okay. Society exists. Do you like Maggie Thatcher?
Yeah. She would be my
Did she say that
favorite.
society didn't exist?
No, she never said that.
I thought she did.
I mean, there's a sense in which society
I
does
thought
that.
she did. But maybe I'm wrong. Okay, fair enough. At any rate, I'm glad you think society exists. That's a step forward.
Yeah,
So
I
we're
should-
moving along. I'm making you move. So, talk about caricatures. The group is the purpose and only government. What I suggested is that technological change depends on cooperation. Depends on cooperation of government, markets.
She said there's no such thing as society.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
And
you
in
admitted that there is such thing as society.
And in the context,
So, there you go.
in the context she said it, I agree with her. So we'll get to that context.
Fair enough. But the point is that So what I suggested is that there is a significant amount of cooperation in order to get. And again, I'm afraid of these sort of absolutes. It's free, and the only way you get stuff is when it's the free market. So let me go back to something you said. You said regulation of phytosanitary rules. It's not regulation. That's the free market, and that's just the government. Well, it's the point. It's the government saying, here's a regulation. Here's in any trade agreement there is a regulation that says you cannot sell these sort of things because you're going to be responsible in a court of law. And that's written in law, so that's a regulation. So this is a question of, it's not whether you're half pregnant or not. You already admitted, so this is the debate between Keynes and Hayek. Hayek says, yes, I admit this, that, and the other, so fair enough. So now the discussion is, where do you want to put the line? By the way, you're already pregnant, man. You admitted that you want some sort of regulation. How much you want, fair enough, you want less, I want more, but you admitted you want some. So it's not no regulation. So the absolute already vanished. I also don't want, if you're going to make caricatures, I don't want to be North Korea. Who wants to be North Korea? So if that's the notion, we want to be on the other extreme, and we want nothing but, a government that controls everything and whatnot, and we put a picture of, President, Chairman Don there on top, and we'll all be happy. So certainly that's a terrible idea. The point is that it's somewhere in the middle. I, for example, would certainly agree that protection of certain quality of certain jobs, which you certainly disagree, is a good reason to have regulations on trade, or certain types of compensation for people that lose in the process of an integrating society. Because again, we're part and we're in the same boat, and it's not true the incentives, which whether you like it or not, you end up coming back when you say that taxes and regulation are a problem for growth. What's basically suggesting that taxes and regulation distort markets and hence don't get prices right, and hence we don't get. The problem with that, we would have to stop this. I'll have to give you a lecture in economics. There's no proof in economics that actually works that way, okay? That markets eat left to their own devices. There's no mathematical proof of that. When they get the proof, Yaron Brook is of a system that has no correlation in anything that you have in the real world, is with all markets, futures and so on and so forth. they cannot prove stability of that thing. So it's a mythical idea. So that's the risk of basing practical sort of ideas on the basis of fundamentalist ideology. I find the free market ideology, which is intrinsical to neoclassical economics and to some version of, I suppose, what's in the back of your head. I cannot sort of, I suppose, be an Ayn Randian, that it's some version of something that is akin to Austrian theory. So it's some version of that, of a general equilibrium in the sense, with complexity and this, that, and the other, but the market somehow sort of get, there is no evidence, there is no theoretical proof that that actually works. So let alone a discussion of how it works in practice. The other thing that concerns me, so now that we're throwing stuff, I think the 70s were a terrible decade. I had to leave my country in the 70s. There was a military coup, in Argentina. I ended up growing up in Brazil. Similar situation, for example, in Chile, and I don't have much time. But the thing that concerns me is that sometimes, and I'm not suggesting this about you by all means, but it's that some people that took this sort of idea of individual freedom being essential, like Friedrich Hayek, he went down to Chile, and there are these pictures of him visiting Pinochet and whatnot, and him saying that, essentially that economic freedom was more important than political freedom, and that economic freedom is the way to get to political freedom. And I find, again, it's the, and I'll finish here, I find the fundamentalist notion, the notion that, that it's only the absolutes that things work, that lead to these, so both on the right and on the left, that lead to these sort of massive violations of the stuff you say you trust and treasure, that it's individual rights.
Okay, so let's wrap it up with some closing statements.
Closing statements,
Take
okay.
some questions.
Yeah, let me just throw.
And by the way, I'm not accused. I'll
clarify Pinochet.
I'm just suggesting that it has led under certain circumstances to that kind of position. So.
I don't believe you can force people to be free, and I don't think you can kill people in the name of trying to get other people to be free like Pinochet did. So I'm very much opposed to Pinochet, even though the economic policies he put in place to a large extent by accident, not because he believed in them, but because he just happened to put in the right people, actually led to Chile going from the poorest country in Latin America to being the wealthiest on a per capita basis in Latin America. But that does not justify anything else that he did. Look, I'm a fundamentalist. I believe in fundamental truths. I believe in the sanctity of the individual. I believe this country was founded on the principle of sanctity of the individual. Unfortunately, the founders were not very consistent about that because they had slavery. But that is the idea that is crucial and it makes this country exceptional. And I do believe in American exceptionalism in that sense. I believe in individual freedom and individual liberty. And that what the role of government should be limited to the protection of individual rights. So every law that comes before government or Congress should be evaluated not based on its utilitarian benefits or costs, not based on which pressure groups want what, which is how it's based today in my view, but based on does this law protect individual rights or doesn't it? And individual rights are something very clear. They are the freedom to act, to gain the values necessary for your own life. It's freedom of action. That's what individual rights protect. Your ability to do what you believe is necessary for your life, as long as you don't violate other people's rights. And the only way to violate other people's rights is by physical force or fraud. That's the only way to violate other people's rights. So the only job of government is to protect us from physical force or fraud. All other economic or social regulations should be gone. And that's true of the bedroom as much as it's true of trade, of the boardroom, right? Government has no business in our lives. It has no business using its coercive power to shape and determine our behavior. If I want to buy something from somebody who happened to be in China, it's none of the government's business. It's none of your business. And indeed, trade, for example, doesn't happen between countries. The United States doesn't trade with China. I trade with some Chinese guy. Or Walmart trades on my behalf with some Chinese company. It's none of anybody's business what happens in that transaction, any more than it's in California's business whether I trade with somebody in Arkansas or in Pennsylvania here. The government has no role unless what I'm doing is defrauding you, or using force on you in some regard, or poisoning you in some regard. That is violating your rights, limiting your ability to act in a physical way. So the fundamental here is not, so there's this distinction between law and regulation, but I don't want to get into that. The key is it protecting individual rights or isn't it protecting individual rights? So morally, government has no business in trade. Government has no business in the internet or in automobile regulations or in any of these, any business. The government has no business in business. Now I would love to be able to rewrite the American Constitution. And have a separation, just like we have a separation of church and state, which I think should be taken a lot more seriously than most people do. A real separation of church and state. I would like to see a separation of economics from state. I don't believe that state has a role in economics. I don't believe it should try to establish our economic behavior. I don't think it should try to protect certain workers and not protect other workers, or bail out certain firms and not bail out other firms, or determine how much money we should have in the economy or not. I think the government should be neutral when it comes to economic policy. There should be a Treasury Secretary in that sense. The markets, we should let markets work, unregulated, uncontrolled, without the imposition of coercion. Government, as President Washington said, and I think in his second inaugural address, government is a gun. The essential characteristic of government is force. That's the difference between government and any other human institution. Guns don't belong in schools. Guns don't belong in boardrooms. Guns don't belong in bedrooms. Guns don't belong in our lives other than to defend ourselves. That's the role of government. Self-defense. That's it. I have to say something about society, because I think Margaret Thatcher was actually quoting Ayn Rand in a sense. And what she said is, in reality, there's no such thing as society. In reality, there are only individuals. But individuals come together and they form groups. Groups in that sense exist, but they can't be the primary. The primary is the individual. Groups are there when they should be voluntary. Groups are there in order to, because we voluntarily choose to associate with other people in cooperative ventures in order to enhance our own lives.
Okay, so let me say a couple of things. And one is, going back to something actually said in the previous iteration, but you repeated here at the end, and I forgot to say something because I wanted to respond to something else. But you gave the example of the island versus going to cities incorporated, and which that's something reasonable. Yeah, people have to cooperate, which thanks God. So we sort of agreed on that. But you see, now you're bringing something to the table, so they're forced to compromise because they cannot, as you admitted then, hope that technological innovation is not the idea of the genius, the Superman. It's done in cooperation. So you need the ideas of other people, you need the ideas of people that came before, the Newton, the giants, and so on and so forth. So you admitted that. So it's not individual, it's a group cooperative effort. The question of whether, who are you putting, who is against individual rights? So nobody's suggesting that you eliminate individual rights by accepting that you have to cooperate. What you're accepting is that once you enter a group, if you enter a group, you accepted the rules of that group. And that's one of the things that, there are several reasons. I assume you will accept the notions of, say, public goods. So there are certain things, or maybe not. So that's the traditional sort of story of why we accept, and there is a debate of what goods are public goods. So, public lighting, whether it's a public defense, is it, or not. It's traditionally defense is the one seen as health, which many people that are libertarian think it's not. I tend to think it's a public good, and by the way, the government does provide it better. So if you look at the cost of Medicare, they have been growing much less than, say, the costs of private insurance. So that's one of the things that but it might not. That's a different question of whether it's a public good or not. So. I have a question for you at the end, but so the other important thing that I want to address is the question of government has no economic role, no business in business, if I'm quoting you right. So let markets work. And that presupposes an interesting thing. I'm always puzzled by this one, teaching economics. That there is this notion that markets, they arise magically, out of thin air. that all of a sudden, boop, markets. I don't know what happened, we already have a market. But when you look at the story of markets, for example, financial markets in the Western world, financial markets in the Western world occur because you have all of these groups that get together in the little city-states in Italy. They're merchants basically that control the local government, and they decide to together pool resources in order to go and do this venture. And they borrow money essentially from themselves, and they create a public debt. And it's the public debt that generates a secure asset, because those public debts were normally backed by taxes. So they agreed on something cooperatively. We're a poor city, Genoa. My family comes from Genoa, distant, lost in the past. And it's a little town in between the mountains and the sea. There's nothing else to do. So they throw themselves in this venture together because it's the way of surviving together. Not because they gave up their individual rights, but because that venture that they get together, they're accepting not just the public debt, but we're going to tax each other, and the taxes are going to pay for that debt. It's the security of that debt, that the debt is guaranteed by taxes of a common people that agree on the form of government that, by the way, not only gives us democracy eventually, way further down the line, but give them a financial market, because now you know what happens? You can trade those bonds in secondary markets, and all of a sudden you have what? Financial markets development. So it's the financial market is a complicated outcome of the relationships of the state, the people, of society, of cooperation, and they arise. If you look at there's a famous book that if you haven't read, you should read. It's a book that everybody in college should read. It's called The Great Transformation by Polanyi. And he tells you how in the 19th century, the three essential markets of capitalism, those that we learn in the textbooks, the labor market, it's created. The financial market, it's created. And the land market, it's created. And regulations are essential to creating markets. When you think of the mythical story of how they created Wall Street, is a bunch of guys after the 1790s sort of crisis that say, these are the rules. If you want to participate in the market, you have to pay a fee. So there are rules, and those rules are a form of self-government. Sometimes self-government is essentially self-government, but sometimes it's, what supposedly in a democracy is self-government is us. So the idea that government is something alien to us, alien to markets, something to be feared, although these days it is to be feared. It's I think a dangerous idea. The government is ourselves, and I think actually, the current election reflects something on ourselves. Probably we are a little bit misogynistic, xenophobic, racist as a society, and we should shape up. So.
You wanted to ask me something.
Oh yes. Did you say that you think you're against all regulation regarding automobiles? So like DUI, those things. Oh, so all things are gone?
Well, DUI is not a regulation on the automobile industry, but I say a DUI is your risk to other people. You're violating other people's rights by driving you. But yes, seatbelt laws definitely.
You're against.
I'm against fuel economy laws. Weight, car distribution. I mean, there's so many regulations that go into automobiles. I'd be against all of those. And I actually would argue that all of those laws make automobiles less safe.
Fair enough. But the other thing connected to that, so I mean, you said that we have the same cars as before, and we have no. So the Google challenge actually led to driverless cars, and we're having electric cars. By the way, the electric car was with us in the 90s. Because of regulation, because of regulations.
It's with us today because the government's subsidizing it, and that's why I resent Tesla and I resent Elon Musk. I consider him, this is a monstrosity. So rich people are buying Teslas. I see them all over the place. I'm subsidizing it, right? Because it's coming out, you're subsidizing it less because you live in Pennsylvania. But the state of California gives Tesla hundreds of millions of dollars at my expense. That's mind-boggling to me. If you want to build an electric car, do it, but do it on your own dime.
Can I ask you a question then? So let's say that have a public. I mean, I think it's a public good. Maybe you don't think it's a public good. The environment. Yeah. So we're going to run into trouble.
Yes.
Apparently, or not. Depending on who you ask. But most people think we are, and we are. But that's another question. Do you think, for example, regulation that so you're certainly against the Paris Agreement or any? Not for the. Yes. I'm not asking for. Paris Agreement is a bad sort of. You're against any kind of regulation regarding the environment. So because one may be against the Paris Agreement.
It depends what you mean by environment. It's a tricky topic, right? Because environment covers a lot of
No,
things.
but the tricky concept is
So if you want to talk about global warming, then let's just say global warming.
No, but let me ask the question right then. So my question goes back to the question of absolutism. So you have, this sort of notion, the solution is, to one extreme. We do nothing, which I don't think we're doing anything. So my point is, so the point is, you think that there should be no kind of regulation. So in terms to prevent, so it's zero approach. You do nothing about regulation of, say, what we put. Factories can put whatever they want up there.
So again, this is the point of poison.
Something.
No, but this is the point of poison.
Yeah, but then it's a regulation.
But no, it's not a regulation.
Slightly pregnant.
If you can prove that what I'm spewing out of my factory is hurting you physically, then I'm hurting you. And there's a long precedent in civil law, well before you needed a regulatory agency to monitor this, to address that. You can't drop your garbage in my backyard. We know that. We've known that for 1,000 years, right?
So you're for a mandate on buying health insurance? Because people are hurting us.
No.
We're paying more, we're getting hurt.
Why? Because we changed the law in 1986, actually, under Ronald Reagan, that said that everybody has to be treated in the emergency room. Everybody. So so if somebody doesn't buy health insurance and is irresponsible, and then walks in and he's got a cold.
Shouldn't be treated in an emergency room?
No, I don't. I don't think there should be a legal mandate. I think the hospital. I mean, in the past, if you were in a life-threatening position, they treated you because that's what doctors do. They treat you, right? But if you came into the emergency room with the snivels, with a cold, they told you to go home. They weren't going to treat you for free. But today, we have mandated that they treat everybody who walks into the emergency room for free. So yes, why buy health insurance? You guys don't need to. Just go to the emergency room and they'll treat you whatever you have. Now certainly if you're dying, doctors will treat you. And then they'll try to bill you and try to get money from you. And people were not dying in the streets in 1985 before this bill passed. It's complete nonsense. So yes, we have and you mentioned Medicare, right? The reason Medicare's costs are cheaper is because they buy in mass and they squeeze doctors. So doctors now, in order to make back the money that Medicare squeezed out of them, raise their fees so the insurance companies has to pass it on to you. So us buying private insurance are subsidizing Medicare. So of course Medicare is cheaper. By the way, that's why healthcare in other countries is cheaper. Because Americans are subsidizing all the research. 75% of R&D comes from the United States. All drugs. We have market prices here. They can sell them below market in other countries, and the pharmaceutical companies. So we're subsidizing all the R&D in pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, sure. There you go.
For the whole world.
Yeah.
And that's why they have good health care, because we're paying a lot of
the
money.
whole world. If you look at pharmaceutical corporations, Western Europe has a few that are also relevant. So, but it's also funded
Because
by
we're
the
free.
governments of Western European countries. So yeah, sure. And you go again to the point that if you look at the US,
Sure. It's called the crowding out effect. If the government stops funding something, private enterprise will stop.
All right, let's take some questions. Chris.
First, thank you both for this. This is awesome. So you guys brought up the concept of public goods, and there's probably some line to draw, right? But do you believe government should pay for roads?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Ultimately, no. I mean, you can't stop paying for roads tomorrow, but ultimately, no. I see no reason why government would have to pay for roads.
So how would that happen?
Developers, businesses, communities. I mean, there's no shortage of ways in which you can fund public roads, particularly today. I mean, 20 years ago, this question would be harder for me to answer, but today it's much easier because you could put up, even if all roads were toll roads, which is not what I believe would happen, you could put a GPS in a car and you could pay exactly based on how many miles and whose roads you travel. So it's easy to solve today. But look, I live in a community where all the roads are private. Why are all the roads private? Because the developer wanted me to live in that community. So he made sure there was access. He made sure to build all the roads inside the community. And, it's a small gated community. And, we take care of the roads because it's in our interest to take care of the roads. I don't need the federal government to take care of my roads. And I don't need an infrastructure bill in order to take care of roads in my community. Businesses want roads. But look, there's no point in really, talking about roads. By the time we get to a society where the only thing government is doing is roads, right? We can talk about it then. Government does so much today. It's in every aspect of my life, and 50% of my life's work in terms of my energy, my effort, my talent goes to the government, right? I pay 50% marginal income, above 50% marginal income tax. There's no justification of that, not for roads. They don't spend any of it for roads, I can guarantee that.
Can I answer this?
Yeah, sure. So that's, again, we tendency to respond on the basis of theoretical questions, and so why did they build roads in the first place? So how do you get the Eisenhower, interstate system? Why? The justification they did.
Are you asking?
Defense.
Yes. So you have it. So it supposedly is because, if the Russians invade us, it's a lie.
Yeah.
I never thought the Russians would invade. But they, sort of pushed that idea in order to do that. Who's behind that?
Well, the government.
There are 3 reasons. Ford, GM, and Chrysler. And they want to sell you cars. And the government goes and does that. So, that's fair enough. That's the way, that's capitalism. He
No.
likes capitalism.
No.
Corporations.
No.
No. You had your time. Let me say this. Because, there is a disingenuous thing here. So he's telling you that he's all for freedom. And that capitalism is fantastic and he has no problem with monopoly. Oh, here you have it. That's it. It's in action. That's the history of capitalism. By the way, capitalism is fine with slavery. As much as the founding fathers, with all their individualism, which wasn't, all men are created unequal, by the way. At least they had the rhetoric of, equality is a good thing. So, for example, I'll ask you, I'm not sure what you would say, Yaron, but do you think education should be, primary education, should be something people should get
Yeah. But I think,
publicly?
oh, you're asking me?
Yes, you. But
No, not publicly, no.
No,
I
not
think they
public.
should
So-
get it, but they should be all
Fair
privately
enough.
funded.
So that's consistent. But so the question is, do you think that public education should be something that it's a right as a citizen? You see, so a right as a citizen, and here we're going to come to some interesting debate, I'm pretty sure. So I think it is. So why would you build a road? So I once was told I was a neoliberal in Ecuador, which is funny because as he knows, that's preposterous. I'm a red commie, he thinks. So
No, I don't.
People have this tendency to view me, as a red commie or as a neoliberal. So they thought I was. He's not a neoliberal. I don't know.
I'm
He's
not a
libertarian.
neoliberal.
So he's a libertarian.
And you're
So
not
it's
a commie, I've met commies.
So the point is, I probably more than you think. But the point is, they said that I was a neoliberal because I was in favor of a certain. I was in favor of development banks spending money on infrastructure, on roads. And so my point was, do you think that public education is a good idea if you are poor indigenous person? Say, I think that an indigenous person in the middle of Amazon in Ecuador should have access to education. Why? And the state should provide it because the markets will not provide it, and he'll be handicapped in life. So if you want to do something about the issues at the bottom, as he said, poverty, you have to give them equality of opportunity. And to do that, you have to give them education. And how in hell are you going to give them education if you give them a road so that they can go to the school and electricity in that school? And so that made me a neoliberal. And that makes me a commie because I'm in favor of giving this guy. But if you're going to be serious about solving the problems at the bottom, you have to deal with the issue of inequality and you have to provide a bunch of public goods. We will have a difference in where you draw the line. My concern is that the line, he wants to draw the line. Good Lord, it's like, it's gone.
Way over there.
And, and I think, the line is somewhere, and mind you, I think also that not all societies want to have the line in the same place, which is a reasonable thing to do. And that's why when they're democratic, they actually can choose and decide where they put their line and how much you do it. But the question here, and I go back always to the question of pregnancy. I don't think pregnancy is a question of, it's a discussion of what kind of, how you're going to deal. Are you going to smoke, or you're going to, eat only healthy, or you're going to, you're going to have a natural, it's a question, but, you are. Once you are, it's not a question, you cannot be half pregnant, And so I'm concerned about those issues. So I do think we need public roads, and there is a need. I'm not suggesting that it's all good. So sometimes it's graft and they're putting their
Can
hands
I
in
say
your pocket.
something? Or?
I'd like to get everybody in.
Okay.
If it's brief.
Well, I just say that that's our capitalism, right? That again, I define capitalism as separation of state from economics. If the state is now intervening by building these massive roads, then yeah, people lobby. And the way to get rid of cronyism, for example, is to get government out of the economy, because then business doesn't have anything to lobby government for, because they're giving them nothing. And
thank you, first off, for a very stimulating debate.
Point.
So I have 2 questions. The first is, would your ideals be the same for both developed and developing countries? Because for the most part, those are apples and oranges. So would you stand by your arguments in that case for both? And then my second question is, without a free market society, how would you propose incentives? Isn't there some sort of ideal form that the people at the bottom tend to look up to and become inspired by?
You want me to go first again?
I can go.
Why don't you go first
Yeah,
this time?
sure.
Just
So,
sit up.
so if you ask me in general if I think that there is a different way of thinking in economics for developing countries, I don't. Actually, that surprises many of my colleagues on the left. So I do think that economics applies in the same way. I do think we have different problems. We face different problems, but the way the markets sort of work is essentially the same. And I would say, if I had to say what's the biggest difference, is in terms of developing countries, I would say two things. So one thing is that most of the technological innovation is done in developed countries, and that has a tendency to be path dependent. So once you go down one line, you reap benefits. There is a thing in technology that comes from the discussion of philosophy of science that's called technological paradigms. So if you're ahead development, sometimes it's bad, by the way. Sometimes you go down a line, and because you're too invested in this, you end up being locked out of some other technological development that is relevant. So coming late to the process of development of capitalism, essentially, creates problems for developing countries. The biggest one is that we need always foreign currency, and not having strong currency, not having the dollar essentially, or the pound before, or the Dutch guilder before, is a problem. So we tend to borrow in not in domestic currency, which is what we were talking about Genoa. We borrow in foreign currency. So you have cycles of default and whatnot, and essentially say the two collapses of the terms of trade and stuff we sort of have. So currency crisis and whatnot. So what do I think about free market society and alternatives? One of the things the economists do that I don't do is I don't do utopia. I find that, and that's part of my issue with Yaron. I think that he does utopia in the real world. He thinks that these utopia of free markets solve all the problems and radical individualism. And I think that's an utopia. And I'm very scared of utopias. By the way, I'm scared when you say we shouldn't treat, most of the people that go to emergency rooms, they don't have flu problems. The workers, they avoid going to the emergency room because if they miss a day of work, they miss their paycheck. They go when they have heavy, serious problems. But that's my view. But fair enough, because it leads to serious consequences for people. So I don't know what would be the alternative. What I tell you is that we don't really have a free market society. We do have a mixed, in the Western world, mixed societies. And I'm okay with that. The point is how, so what would be this, I do like the idea of Scandinavian, social democracy, sure. Is it adaptable and something that you can use in the US or say in Brazil? Well, it's problematic. These are countries that are multicultural, gigantic, the histories are different, we have a history of slavery, so I'm not sure that's immediately feasible. So I don't have an utopia that I can tell you that's, but I'm in favor of societies democratically discussing how they move towards what they think is a good path for development.
Wait, sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I meant incentives. Not alternatives.
Oh, incentives. So, look, it's what I said. What are incentives? So incentives are not just egoistic incentives. As he said, there are people that go, people do things for all sorts of reasons. So there is you may decide that you love, physics and you want to do this thing and end up doing research in this, and maybe you end up wealthy in a society that's acceptable or not, But, on the other hand, because you got, and several of these people that we're talking, Shockley, whatever, they got public educations, And so if you got that, it means you have to give back something to society. How much back? It's fair enough. It's a question that it's open to debate. And it's not going to be, by the way, it's not going to be the same amount in all. So what we used to do back in the 40s and 50s, it's not the same as what we did in, we're doing right now. So I'm open for, I think that also is a question that it's open for the democratic sort of play of ideas.
Okay, just
Sorry, I was running over time.
No, we didn't do time.
I think the economic ideals are the same, but there's a structural issue that has to happen before economics. And a lot of times when countries go from a very authoritarian towards freedom, they forget the structural point, which is different because developed countries usually have it already. And that is property rights and the rule of law. You cannot have markets until you have property rights and the rule of law. And most of undeveloped countries forget that step. Russia, for example, when it went for communism, forgot the step of the rule of law. So what they got was in a sense, the mafia controlling, oligarchs controlling all the industries because they had bigger guns than anybody else. And then they bribed the government to protect them, and they elected Putin, and now he's their boss. So it's a corrupt scheme of things. So you have to first establish property rights, and you have to establish the rule of law in order to then put together your economic policy. And I would say once you do that, the economy should be. I'm a big fan when it comes to Latin America. My guess is you're not, but I don't know, of Hernando de Soto, a Peruvian economist, who says that one of the ways in which you would restructure Latin American economies is by giving property rights to the peasants. Right, give them capital in a sense. They own the land anyway. They've been on this land forever. They cultivate. Give them property rights, and then they can use that as capital to do other things. And that's how you change the dynamics in Latin America. And I'm a big supporter of that, big believer in that. But that's a pre-stage, and then you establish markets. Markets, when there's no laws, markets, or when there's no rule of law, then what you have is the rule of the gun. Then what you have is the gang with the biggest gun gets all the goodies, and that's what happened in Russia, for example, in the 1990s. It wasn't capitalism; it was anarchy. It was closer to anarchy. And I'm not an anarchist, by the way, as you've noticed. I emphasize the role of government. In terms of incentives, I think we somewhat agree here in the sense. Don't overestimate incentives. Right? Not everybody's incentivized by money, or not to the same degree. Some of us are incentivized by other passions. If you're an artist, I told my kids, pursue your passion, right? Now, I'm living to regret that because both of them pursued the entertainment business, and they're probably, it's hard for them to make money, right? But they're pursuing their passions, and they're not pursuing money, right? So I think you have to watch, the reason they have capitalism is not because it provides incentives. The reason to have capitalism, in my view, is because it leaves us free to live as we see fit, including the choice not to pursue money, or not to pursue money as a primary, or not to pursue a lot of money as a primary. You need some money to live, so don't become paupers. I do want to say this quickly. It's not part of the question, although it's somewhat related. If you're interested in the economics of free markets, then I would read Ludwig von Mises. Now, it's true. The Austrian economists don't prove this stuff mathematically, but that's because we believe that economics is not primarily a mathematical science, that is, human behavior cannot be modeled mathematically. So von Mises doesn't do math, but I still think he proves his case. Now, everything else you teach in economics is the opposite of what I just said, so this is just a little bit of counterbalance.
Actually, no. I mean, von Mises, if I may say something about that, von Mises is a neoclassical economist. Everything you learn, he's an Austrian economist. So he says exactly the same thing. So if you go and read Mises and Hayek, they basically say, look at their theories, for example, of the rate of interest. It's savings and investment. It's basically the supply and demand in the capital market, and you get it's a loanable funds theory. It's essentially the same as you have in Vixel, you have in any neoclassical economist. I do history of thought, so I have read them. And the problem with von Mises is not that he doesn't do mathematics. The problem with von Mises is that he doesn't do logic. And logic and evidence matter, man. And there is no proof of this stuff. The notion is generically that markets do wonderful things, and you hear angels, and they get the prices right. You see, but markets don't necessarily do that. I'm not saying that. I think that there is a confusion in another thing that you discuss capitalism as an environment in which you can get the right to do what you want. That's democracy. And so capitalism is not a political system, although, and there have been very different political systems under capitalism. Democracy is sort of what you want when you want to be able to do what you want, and we'll have a difference on that. And I would suggest to you that capitalism, with some of its tendencies to generate excessive inequality, to generate excessive power in the hands of people, so perhaps you think that money is voice and people should have the right to use, money in the public arena to buy, politicians, which I think leads to, corruption and cronyism and whatnot. So I'm saying, it seems you're paying lip service to the idea of freedom, if you believe in that, Citizens United. So in that case, capitalism is part of the problem that won't allow certain people to reach their potential and and to have democracy. I'm not saying that capitalism there is a thing in capitalism that it's really important. Capitalism is the first system of production that it's really dynamic. Capitalism, because of its inherent need of competition and outpace the others, leads to innovation. That's one of the incentives, if you want, to your question. And I think that that's certainly something that has had a positive effect. So not everything that comes from capitalism, but it has a downside. You see, it generates too much concentration and maybe to people not being able. So his kids are free to, and my kid too. Though he's still in high school, but I'll pursue mine. To pursue whatever they want. But the counterpart of this is that somewhere there is a girl in Bangladesh that is suing, stuff at, essentially with slave labor, wages. And so that's a counterpart of capitalism. So it's a dangerous system. I'm not suggesting that that's my point. I don't have an idea that we put this out and we'll solve all the things. I'm very scared about notions of this kind of thing. In general.
Let's do, we have time for one more.
That's it? Wow.
Let's do all the way in the back.
Yes, thank you. I hope this isn't a practical snare, but I thought this topic of healthcare regulation and the sniffles was interesting, and you brought it up recently. The expectation that diseases will be treated. This is my question for Dr. Brook, obviously, both of you. That diseases will be treated not for emergency rooms or even doctor's office as a cost for healthcare. For example, as making hospitals less safe because of the sniffles, because of bacteria and viruses, that the regulations might lead people by way of an expectation that healthcare will pay and treat anything. That this might be a hidden cost. Is that what you were saying? Is that a reasonable?
I'll just say quickly, just to clarify. All I said was because emergency rooms are free. Right? They have to treat you no matter what if you go in the evening to an emergency room, you're right, they don't take a day off of work. They all go in the evening. And I've been to an emergency room with real issues in the evening. And what you get is long, long lines of people because they're not feeling well. Not because they have a life-threatening disease, but because they're not feeling well. They use it as their primary care physician. And that cost has to be borne by somebody, so it's borne by those people who pay insurance. And that's the fee rider problem that you get in the healthcare markets as they were before Obamacare. And it's still are because so many people are still uninsured. But that's just a point of clarification. I don't think it's essential. Do you want to take another question?
Sure, do you give it the bottom?
Oh, no.
We can have a whole discussion about healthcare.
Very briefly. So if you're concerned with that kind of stuff, you go to Western Europe. U.S. has a very peculiar system because we provide health insurance only for the elderly, and that comes from Social Security. That's the only country in the world. It's
Medicare.
Medicare, yes. So it's for the elderly. So that doesn't happen. If you go to Europe, you receive health in most Western European countries on the basis of being a citizen, like the story I said about public. So once you have that, and there is a mandate of the state of doing that, the costs are lower too. And they do treat everybody in hospitals, and it's cheaper, and they do have better health outcomes.
So should we
and they're more egalitarian societies. Oh, I'm for public health.
So should we debate this since we brought it up? So we might as well end with this. Yeah, I disagree thoroughly. I come from a socialized medicine country. My father was a doctor in a socialized medicine country, a country that has more doctors per capita than any country in the world because it's a Jewish country. And if you're really sick, my father would advise you to get on a plane and get to the Mayo Clinic if you can afford it, in spite of all of that. If you look at survivability rates, if you look at catastrophic stuff, if you look at the number of people who in the NHS in England die waiting for an MRI, die waiting to be diagnosed. Yes, we pay more for healthcare in the United States. Cool. I paid more for healthcare because I got treated and I got examined and I was told, I once had this weird thing going on, and I was told there's no problem, you're okay. That was worth the money, to be known that. If I'd been in Israel, I would have waited 3 weeks, and if I had something, I would be dead. So, and as I said, de facto, we still have private healthcare in the United States, subsidizes the healthcare for the rest of the world. So, no, healthcare outcomes here are much better. If you look at the numbers, so let's look at the numbers, right? If you're a Swede in the United States, you live as long as a Swede in Sweden, or maybe longer. Look at the data. If you're a Japanese in the United States, Japanese live longer than 80 people on the planet. If you're Japanese in America, you live as long or longer than a Japanese in Japan. When you control for the fact that we are so diverse and that there are enormous genetic factors that determine longevity, then the differences in life expectancy disappear in the United States. And that's true of a lot of things when you compare Scandinavia to America. If you look at Scandinavians in America versus Scandinavians in Scandinavia, they're just as happy, if not happier. They're wealthier than their Scandinavian brothers.
Come on, man, that argument, yeah.
It's
so
true.
Of course, yeah, sure,
It's
of course
true.
it's true.
Yeah.
If you get Scandinavians that arrive in the 19th century, that are white and blonde, and are part of the
They've done very
wealthy
well.
part, yeah, sure, they've done very well, and they will have the best healthcare case. It doesn't matter if it's private or not. And then you're putting together African Americans that we imposed 400 years of slavery, and according to you, it's tough luck. And and they have obviously they push down some of the health outcomes, and you're telling me, screw them.
No, I'm not saying screw them. I'm saying you can't blame private medicine for that.
But let me say this, because I think we should end on this note. This is an important point, because you said, who cares? Who cares about inequality? It's all about these three problems: poverty at the bottom, cronyism on top, and growth. And again, you pay lip service to the solving the problems at the bottom, because your solution means those black guys that have, say, higher rates of diabetes.
Sure.
Screw them. They should, it's their problem. It's their responsibility. Even though part of the reason why they're there is because they're poor, because we oppressed them over years, because we have issues associated to obesity and all of those things that come with low income. So the notion, if you're not going to pay lip service to that, yes, the way to think about, and the other thing, you think of medicine as being just curative. You don't think of the role, the preventive medicine. So a good part of our problem is we let the problems accumulate. Whereas a good chunk of what happens in Western Europe is that we have preventive, medicine. And so most of the problems are caught early on. And so you don't need the expensive care. So he wouldn't be dead, because you wouldn't need the 3, weeks in advance, hopefully, because you would have, some other thing going on that would help, and wouldn't lead to this sort of stuff. So, the notion that, we have better outcomes is very hard to defend. It's post-factual, I would say.
No, it's empirically true. And I'll say I don't give lip service to the poor. I care about poor kids. I care about poor kids that are priced out of the labor market by minimum wages. I care about poor kids that are priced out of jobs because of licensing laws. I care about poor kids that don't have a job because we've limited growth and jobs are not being created in this country. The way to solve the problem of poverty is by more freedom and more jobs, not by more regulations and more controls and more redistribution.
All right, we'll stop it there. Let's thank our two debaters. Yaron's book is for sale on